This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is Loren Lester, the voice of Robin and Nightwing.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review.
Hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com.
And on your favorite podcast app.
Gotham City is out of control.
An entire city screaming in fear.
Supervillains walk the streets, preying on the innocent.
They will learn the true nature of power.
The police are powerless. A creature prowls this urban wasteland.
Who's that?
He moves in darkness. For some, he is a rumor, a name whispered in the corridors of the underworld, waiting for the chance to strike. Let every criminal know the acid taste of fear.
You crazy? Bat! Giant bat!
Gotham has forgotten what justice means. The Dark Knight is here to remind them. Who are you? Batman. Good guys wear black.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 200 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts. With me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter account, and the man who has been with me for every single episode along the way here. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, happy 200th episode to you, my friend.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, everybody. We've been doing this for a few years now. We often have talked about that on our own show, and I think when we've guested on other people's shows, but this all started with us sending different listicles of people ranking Batman the Animated Series episodes back and forth, and arguing or sort of debating with ourselves and with each other where we'd put certain episodes on our own lists. And then we thought, well, what if we just did a podcast where we ranked all of them? And then that sort of expanded into why just stop at Batman. And here we are, 200 plus 30 some bonus episodes later. We are here with our 200th episode of the DCAU Review.
That is right. Yeah, technically we are 236 episodes deep at this point. If you count bonus episodes, and we've had additional spin-off. Actually, it's probably 238 with Discuss This League, and then
I was gonna say, I feel like we did 236 episodes just on tie-in comics last year.
Good point. It did seem like
brutal, but yes. No, lots of fun. We always have fun talking about that. But yes, of our flagship show here, the main DCAU Review. This is the 200th DC animated thing that we've reviewed. We obviously review lots of cartoons. We've reviewed some movies. We've reviewed even some animated shorts at one point. So we've mixed it up over these 200 episodes. But here we are back home where it all started, with a pretty iconic pair of Batman the Animated Series episodes to talk about this week, that being The Demon's Quest Parts 1 and 2.
That is right, and I am excited to get into this very exciting two-parter with you, Liam. But before we do, of course, we are going to get the official IMDb Internet Movie Database synopsis, brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to The Pod Tower at youtube.com/The Pod Tower. Subscribe there. And check out our video library there. We have all of our episodes, including bonus episodes, listed there for you. So you can check out the entire library of episodes at youtube.com/The Pod Tower. Plus, you can get some great content from our friends there as well. Liam, without further ado, let's get that official IMDb synopsis for episode number 200.
That's right. And since, of course, this is a two-parter, we have two.
Oh, baby.
Yes, it's just for the special occasion, for the milestone, giant size, extra size issue here that we're giving you guys this week. We do, in fact, have two synopses for The Demon's Quest Parts 1 and 2, which were written by Denny O'Neil and Len Wein, directed both parts by Kevin Altieri, friend of the show. Music for part 1 by Michael McQuistion, and music for part 2 by Harvey Cohen, and animation for both parts by TMS. And those synopses read as such. Robin is kidnapped, and Batman unexpectedly joins forces with Ra's al Ghul, whose daughter Talia has also been taken. All right, and here's a synopsis for part 2. Batman must stop Ra's al Ghul's plot to destroy the Earth.
Oh, come on, episode 200. I was hoping IMDb. I mean, it's short and to the point. It's not one of those giant run-on sentences. No. That's for sure. Yeah, it feels like, yeah, I guess, that's a C. C's get degrees, as they say. Passing grade. Good. No extra credit for you, though, IMDb, for that part, too.
That's fair.
But yes, and friend of the show, Kevin Altieri, of course, directed this episode, Liam, which was actually based on 2 different issues of the original Batman run, issue number 232 and 244, with a story by Mr. O'Neill for 232, and then with pencils by the great Neil Adams, inks by Dick Giordano, also on both of those. So so it's a interesting 2-parter here. I think this is one that we definitely had on videotape at some point. So I'm very familiar with the plot for the most part. Of course, we get the opening scene, which actually the first thing that I noticed off the bat, we don't get a title card for this episode. A true title card is not what introduces this episode. Instead, we have this opening sequence right out of the credits where Robin is entering his dorm room coming back from college and is ambushed in the dark by this masked assailant that has this dog looking sort of Egyptian maybe style Middle Eastern looking mask with these white eyes, and Robin is knocked unconscious. We then cut to the Batcave shortly thereafter, after we get the title of our episode, and we learn that Batman has anxiously been looking for Robin for 2 days. No one has heard from Robin or Dick Grayson in 2 days. Alfred, looking extremely worried and upset, meets him as he returns to the cave and gives him a package that he said arrived not too long ago. He's given this package, and wouldn't you know it, in the package is maybe Bruce's worst nightmare, as it's revealed that somebody has Robin at knife point and is sort of taunting Batman at this point to potentially come and find him, so to speak. And that's right at that moment, Batman, as he unmasks and is sort of just sitting there contemplating what his next move is interrupted by our main antagonist of the show.
So, they know your identity, Detective.
Who are you? How did you get in here?
You must forgive Ubu, Detective. He is well trained. Allow me to introduce myself. I am he who is called Ra's al Ghul.
The Demon's Head. I thought you were only a legend.
I am quite real. And as I am sure you realize by now, my reputation for resourcefulness is well deserved. As you can see, we have a common problem. Your ward was abducted on the same night as my daughter. You do remember my daughter?
You're Talia's father?
Yes. But surely you would not expect her to mention me by name. Keep your distance. I am merely old. Older, perhaps, than you can imagine. But not so old that I cannot assist you in your search.
I get the message. Okay then, for openers. Look at the blade. It's used by a cult of mercenaries based in Calcutta. Even the rope appears to be made of a hemp indigenous to that area.
Well done, Detective. You are worthy of your reputation.
That's right. So yeah, I think it's also showing it's a telegram addressed to Bruce Wayne.
Right.
But it has a note attached saying, to the Batman, save him if you can. So And immediately we are aware, as you mentioned, we are introduced waltzing right into the Batcave along with his trusty right-hand man. Ubu is in fact Ra's al Ghul, who we did get a glimpse of at the end of Off Balance previously, an episode we reviewed with the show's director, Kevin Altieri. You can hear that one in the archives. But yes, immediately we are setting up that Ra's is on a completely different level and a completely different kind of threat than anybody that we've seen before. And right as Batman is sort of ready to spring into action, we find out that at least seemingly Ra's comes in peace as he alerts Batman that not only has Robin been taken, but on the same night, his daughter Talia also was taken. And he actually has his own photo of both of them being held together. So that sets up, we get a lot of that. There's a little bit of expository there where you have to get all the info of, yes, Talia is Ra's daughter, and they've both been taken, and now it's time for them to sort of jet off. And that's sort of where we get this very, and we'll certainly talk a lot about this in visuals, I'm sure, but we get it's a very cinematic experience from here on out for really the rest of this part and for the next part. It's a series of sort of exotic locations, certainly not locations we're used to seeing in Batman the Animated Series, as I believe they first go to India to track down Batman notices the knife that is used in the photo of Robin would be traced to some mercenary gang. Naturally, he's Batman. He could just do that. And so they go jet setting around the world, and then right as they get to India, they're sort of accosted by this group of mercenaries who attack them, and finally Batman's able to take them down and threatens the last one into revealing that the boy and the woman have been taken to Malaysia. And this really does become sort of a series of fetch quests, as they would be called in video games. You get to the final boss of the level and you think you're all done, and then the princess is in another castle, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's interesting, though, we learned very quickly is that Ubu is ultra protective of Ra's honor, insisting that Ra's al Ghul go first before any of them. And he's very, let's say, forceful in the way that he enforces this sort of idea, throwing Batman out of the way on not once but two separate occasions at this point. And as you said, they head to Malaysia, where they're sort of investigating this spot in the shadow of a volcano where they were told to go. And Batman wanders into this room, and wouldn't you know it, a trap door latches behind him, and he's suddenly locked in this room where a Black Panther is released. So if you ever wanted to see Batman versus Black Panther, not that Black Panther, but a Black Panther, this is your chance right here, and at least in animated form here, is we get an interesting little bit here. Batman going toe to toe with this wild animal and outsmarting him using his cape, and he just gives him a little nap. That's all. He gives him a little knockout gas, puts him to sleep for a little bit, but through this, Ra's and Ubu eventually break in, and they stumble upon a map at this point that has been left there. And Batman notices a faint scratch that leads them to another trail that they believe is, and Ra's just happens to be familiar with that area.
Congratulations, Detective, on thwarting our tormentors. Obviously, our quest was meant to end here.
Maybe, maybe not. Look at this, a map of the Himalayas. There's a faint scratch, almost certainly made by a fingernail, tracing a route.
Indeed, I am familiar with that area, and the nearest field large enough to accommodate my aircraft is 100 miles from our destination. So I will arrange for a helicopter when one is needed.
After you.
Batman is forced to jump out of the helicopter in his parka with the promise that Ra's and Ubu will be close behind. And as he does, wouldn't you know it, Batman avoids a launching some gunfire that's coming his way. And as he lands in the snow kind of prematurely, he looks up behind him, and the helicopter is there's a missile that is launched towards it and shoots it down. And it's a fiery crash. Batman goes to sort of investigate it, but also, wouldn't you know it, there are some men with guns on skis that are in hot pursuit, and as they come up to the aircraft or the helicopter, they are surprised to find that the parka on the ground that once belonged to Batman is in fact empty, and we get one of the coolest visuals. We'll talk about that later, but Batman bursting through the snow to fight these guys, which is a direct
worth noting that twice in this episode Batman stops something or someone trying to kill him by throwing an article of clothing that distracts his opponent, and
that's
then
right, a panther and humans. It works on both animals of all kinds,
both easily distracted by articles of clothing.
There you go. Well, and at this point, Batman is close enough and walks the rest of the way to find just where this compound is. And as he enters in, he happens to see in the shadows a young man tied to a chair, dressed in red and green. And thankfully, it's not an elf, it's Robin.
Robin.
Huh? Batman!
You okay?
Am I glad to see you?
I'll have you free in a minute. Been here long?
A couple days, I think. I still don't know who grabbed me.
That is right. And he sort of walks in. He's about to free Robin, sort of asking him how long he's been in this facility. And we feel as though Batman's starting to put things together. But before he can free Robin, he's attacked by even more sort of mercenary looking guys with axes and other cool weapons we'll talk about in visuals. And after Batman defeats him and frees Robin, Robin mentions he still doesn't know quite who grabbed him. And that is when we see this mysterious villain who we first saw in the cold open of the episode in Robin's dorm. Batman leaps forward and removes the mask to reveal that the perpetrator was none other than Ra's al Ghul himself. And that's the sort of the double reveal here, is that this has all sort of been an elaborate test as Ra's is looking for an heir to marry his daughter. Very sexist Ra's. He can't imagine a world where Talia takes over, so he needs a man to marry her.
Well, I guess we kind of skipped over one of the plot points that is revealed is as they're driving through this rainforest in one of their travels, Ra's reveals sort of his, I don't know, some might call it Green New Deal. I don't know. He's really not happy about the way that the billionaires and the world as a whole are treating Mother Earth, and that they're cutting down the rainforests and they're using up its resources, and they're using it in such a rapid way that it will be diminished before it could ever be replenished. And he has this kind of back and forth with Batman, and Bruce sort of defends himself because Ra's lumps him in with these millionaires, saying, you are the ones that are depleting our resources. And Bruce sort of defends himself, saying, well, actually, I donate millions of dollars a year to help preserve this very rainforest. And so that's sort of the foreshadowing that we get here of ultimately what Raish's goal is. And then I thought he was a very progressive person in that moment, thinking that he's thinking about the earth. He's thinking about
environmentally progressive, socially perhaps a bit more conservative.
I would say he's very archaic. As soon as he said he needed a man to take over his operation, I was like, Ra's, man, you're not as progressive as I thought you would. Come on, man.
That's right. So yes, we get sort of Ra's making his sales pitch to Batman to sort of take on in his stead, and of course Batman turns him down, and as he and Robin begin to leave, they have another Batman finally gets to have it out with Ubu, who has sort of reached his breaking point with, and as Batman and Robin are sort of ready to face off with more of Raish's goons, we see Ra's collapse, and Talia informs us that he is truly dying, and that we need to get him to for the first full name check of the episode, a Lazarus pit, which sort of brings us to the finale of part 1 as they sort of slowly and dramatically lower Ra's into the pit. And, Batman and Robin are so skeptical. They think this isn't going to help anything. This is going to kill him. If anything, it'll kill him quicker. But yes, bursting forth back out of the pit in quite a dramatic fashion. We'll talk about in visuals once again. Ra's does come out, but he's not quite himself as he's succumbs to madness and seemingly is about to take his own daughter and throw her into the pit. And that's our to be continued, which leads right into where we pick up part 2 as he is continuing to sort of march towards the pit as Ubu informs us that while it does revive the dead, a healthy person will be killed if they enter the Lazarus pit. So Batman and Ubu sort of work together to snap Ra's out of it. Thanks in no small part to Talia, who gets to give him a strong pimp hand to wake him up. And once again, Ra's sort of makes another pitch for Batman to join him. I always wonder what would happen to Robin if Batman said yes. It feels like in the 60s show when Catwoman kept asking Batman to marry him, and he'd be like, what about Robin? And she'd be like, we could just kill him.
And you know what? The funny thing is that when at the end of part 1, before Ra's begins to die, we get the reveal that, Batman is sort of perplexed as to why Ra's would pick him. And when he says, well, it's because I've observed you. This has been a big test. And Batman, has clearly been a great detective in this. And Ra's has been watching him admirably throughout. There's actually one part back in the first attack when they're in India and in Calcutta, and Ra's gets this look on his face where he goes, yes. And it reminded me of like the yes sickos meme. Ra's is just like watching Batman fight them off. He's like, yes. He's got the same yes sickos meme look. But yes. So in that moment, after he's revealed that he's not only used this opportunity to test to see if Batman is up to it, but he reveals that Talia is in love with him. And Batman sort of gets this perplexed look, and then he says, he looks at Robin and says, ready to go?
I'm deeply impressed.
As am I.
Ready to go?
Well, if you say so, though it was just starting to get interesting.
The Master gave you no permission to leave.
I didn't ask for any.
And Robin also then responds with this very perplexed look where he looks at Batman, he looks at Talia, and then he looks back at Batman. And there's no dialogue. It's just at that point, and that's the point where Ra's begins to die. But my thought process was the same thing. It was like Robin is just such the third wheel or fourth wheel in this whole weird thing, fifth wheel. I don't know. Very strange. A fourth wheel on a tricycle, I guess. Maybe.
That's right. So yes, it's an important note to mention that Talia has apparently fallen quite head over heels with Batman after their previous adventure together. And despite that, Batman and Robin, Batman, I should say specifically, once again turns Ra's down. And so Ra's sort of causes a self-destruct, and we begin to see a little bit of friction between Ra's and Talia as she asks him if he's going to destroy their home just to sort of make this point to try to kill Batman and Robin. And he tells them that the only thing that matters really is the mission, and that Batman and Robin have just seen too much and they know too much and they can't be allowed to interfere any further. So we get a pretty fun sequence once again that we'll talk about in visuals as Batman and Robin escape the crumbling facility. And thankfully, just over the other half of this mountain is the bustling city here. And wouldn't you know it, Wayne Enterprises has a subsidiary here in Nepal. And Bruce and Dick head there, and they're able to, thanks to a word that Robin overheard quite a few times while he was held captive, they are able to locate him through a satellite that shared a name with a certain Greek god, and that leads Batman and Robin to know where they have to go. They have to go to the sub-Saharan, I guess it's the African desert,
You okay?
Sure. I wish I'd worn the thermal tights, but other than that... By the time we get down this mountain, he could be halfway to his desert stronghold, wherever that is.
Then we gotta find out where. He's going to realize his dream of a green and balanced Earth at any cost. Even if that means destroying half the planet's population to do it.
But where do we even start looking?
You were his prisoner for a week. You must have overheard something.
Well, there was one thing, a word I heard several times. It was, Orpheus. Yeah, that's it.
Orpheus, from Greek mythology. He descended into the netherworld to bring his beloved back from the dead. But according to the database, Orpheus is also the name of a privately owned satellite launched into synchronous orbit over a year ago.
Coincidence?
Yeah, right.
What's it orbiting over?
What else? A desert. The Sahara Desert. And the exact coordinates have to be Ra's al Ghul's desert stronghold.
I don't think we get any more specific locations than that, but
I think he says, yeah, he just says Sahara. He says the Sahara Desert in Africa based on the coordinates that they trace over the map, but it's not a specific country that they say.
That's right. So Robin gets plane duty in this one. So he drops Batman off and flies away until we see him again at the end of the episode. But yes, Batman sort of takes off towards the city. He sees a sort of an army of Ra's goons all traveling by camel, and sort of takes one down and dresses up as one and sort of tries to start making his way into Ra's facility here. But very quickly, almost preposterously quickly, he runs afoul of Ubu once again, and the rest of Ra's thugs are able to finally take him down. And I shouldn't say unmasked. They take off his turban and his whatever he was wearing over his face, his scarf, to reveal that he is Batman. And he is once again confronted by Ubu and Ra's and Talia.
Yep, and that's kind of where we get our true reveal of what Ra's plot is, because it's at this point Ubu is desperate to kill Batman. He's the only guy with a brain.
Good instincts.
in this whole room. He's like, Master, shall I do away with him? And he's like, no, and Batman's just like, well, if you're gonna kill me, you can just tell me your plan. And Ra's is like, I will tell you my plan. And then proceeds to tell him his entire plan, which of course involves dropping bombs into various different Lazarus pits across the entire Earth. And this dropping these bombs will cause the Lazarus pits to erupt and then flood. And then once it floods, there will be countless deaths, as Batman points out, which Ra's actually arrogantly responds and says, actually, we have counted, and it's actually 2,056,986,000 deaths that would occur from this. And Batman at this point, his response is absolutely perfect. He says, yes, I understand now. And Ra's sort of looks at him kind of like with this expectant look, and he goes, that you are absolutely insane. And it's just the best response. And Ubu again is just like, let me kill him. I want to do away with him at this point. And Ra's, for whatever reason, insists on, in his arrogance, making Batman watch his plan come to fruition. This, of course, leads to Batman being led away to a holding cell. He insists he's gonna take him away, but not before he goes, because supposedly this might be the last time she sees him. Talia gives him a little kiss. She gives him a little kiss on the lips. And despite Batman, it's interesting. I love how they did this, actually, because I've seen this episode so many times and it never dawned on me until this watching of this episode. But she passes him the thing that ultimately allows him to free himself through this kiss. She kisses him, and through the kiss, he ends up getting something placed in his mouth that is able to help him break free of the locks. I don't know. Maybe it's Captain Obvious. Maybe it's like glaringly obvious and I'm just an idiot. But for whatever reason, I had never noticed that before. I just assumed Batman had like an extra like bobby pin in his mouth or something like that that he had thought of to put in there earlier. Because as you said, they rip his shirt off and take his utility belt off so he can't escape. But Talia kisses him, passes him this little piece of metal to help him break his locks, and then he of course escapes and then starts off this massive explosion, blowing up the ammunitions holding for this group here at Raish's desert holdup. And it's at this point Raish believes it's time for him to deal with Batman himself, as he sort of walks out of the fire directly and challenges Batman to a final duel to see if really who is the superior person at this moment. So he and Batman have a sword fight. And just like, what else are you going to do? A shirtless sword fight between two grown men in the middle of the desert as this compound explodes around them. A very cinematic part of the episode. And as Batman and him sort of go up, he sort of almost makes him walk the plank almost as he's balancing on the side of a Lazarus pit, and they're sort of fighting there. And at this point, Batman realizes the countdown which Raish has put into motion to begin the satellite to move into place to signal all of the bombs to be dropped into the Lazarus pits. Batman realizes he doesn't have time really to deal with Raish at this point, and he takes the sword in his hand, hurls it towards the satellite right there in the facility, causing an explosion and causing it to throw the satellite in space, the Orpheus satellite, out of orbit at that point, thus foiling Raish's plan. And at this point, Raish proceeds to lunge at Batman a couple times with his sword. Batman, of course, unarmed at this point, having hurled that sword towards the satellite. And it's at this moment that Raish lunges at him just one too many times. Batman slides out of the way. Raish has jammed the sword onto the side of this the pit there, sort of just barely hanging on. Batman, in true heroic fashion, reaches out for Raish's hand and asks him to grab his hand. And it appears that Raish is initially going to grab it, and then he decides, no, it's at this point I'm going to let myself pretty much die. So he drops into the pit. We assume that Raish, because he is living at this point, and the little tidbit that Ubu had shared before about a healthy living person not surviving a trip to the Lazarus pit, that this is likely the end of Raish. So Batman and Talia walk out into the desert and to meet Robin in the biplane at this point, and that's where we get our last little scene here, and a little bit of to be continued.
Yes, we do get a little bit of an open ending, as you mentioned there. We get Raish falls into the pit and sort of have this aftermath, and Talia again sort of iterates that she shares the same goals as her father, but maybe doesn't agree with his exact methoding. A real centrist position Talia has taken in this debate here.
You must understand, beloved. I share my father's vision and seek the same ends, but I do not choose his means to those ends.
I know.
What's to become of me, then? Am I to be your prisoner?
So it's finally over? We've seen the last of Ra's al Ghul?
Looks that way.
But yes, she asks Batman what will happen. Is he going to arrest her? And they share a very nice, and again, it's one of the, I think, one of the most iconic shots in the whole series. But they share a nice romantic moment, and then he leaves her in the middle of the desert. So Batman gets on the plane to fly off as Robin instinctively asks, have we finally seen the last of Ra's al Ghul? And Batman simply says, well, it certainly looks that way. And as you mentioned, Cal, we get one final shot of the Lazarus pit, and we see a hand burst forth, and we hear a very familiar laugh, as we know that we are not quite done with this particular rogue just yet. And that's where we end our 2-part adventure.
That's right. So I guess we can begin talking about our overall thoughts here. We tried to throw as many tidbits in here as we could, but I love this episode. And this is honestly, I went back and checked out both of these issues that it's based on, issue 232 and 244 of Batman, on the wonderful DC Universe app. Liam, truly my favorite app.
It's a wonderful app.
Isn't it just it's so great. I can't recommend it enough. It's just the best. Whenever you just want to flip back to one of these issues, boom, it's right there. So I pulled it up. I was looking over it, and honestly, it's a very faithful adaptation and a sort of combination of both of those issues. And a lot of the same plot beats, a lot of the same plot points, a few modifications, I think, for the episode itself, as oftentimes you have to do in order to make things a little bit smoother and a little bit more entertaining. So I think overall this is a great faithful adaptation. It's a great story by the great Denny O'Neil. I think the most interesting thing, especially there will be no spoilers listed here, but if you're interested, you can check out our last bonus episode where we covered The Batman, 2022's The Batman, if you're interested in hearing our take on the Robert Pattinson Batman. But one of the things that I loved about that particular movie is there's a lot of Batman being a detective in that movie. And I think part one of this, it's not by accident that Ra's refers to Batman as detective. That's his nickname for him. That's how he refers to him. And Batman does nothing but detective work in that very part one episode there. And then it actually continues into part two when he has to figure out, just what Orpheus has to do with this whole situation here. So I love that we get Batman being a detective here. We get that Batman throws back, like at the end when he realizes that Ra's is behind it. He's like, yeah, I kind of suspected it from the beginning because of these things that you said. And also the fact that Ubu let me go first in the scene with the Black Panther. Oh yeah. Oh, and and he lists the things where his thought process went and why he was thinking this entire time. So I love Batman being a detective. I love that this is a great showcase for that. I think there are just some of the most iconic scenes for this episode or for this series in these two episodes, whether it's the Lazarus pit trip, whether it's the sword fight on the edge of the Lazarus pit, that, like you said, the kiss in the desert with Talia. It's just, there's so many scenes here. And it's interesting because so many of these scenes were eventually adapted into the intro for the Adventures of Batman and Robin too. So
absolutely.
You're so familiar. You're incredibly familiar with these. Batman and Robin jumping off the top of that mountain, and them climbing up the rope to escape the Lazarus pit. But I think it's a really fun episode. I think it adapts really, really well from that original story from Mr. O'Neil. And I think it holds your attention. It's a fun adventure all the way through, and I had a lot of fun revisiting it. I ended up giving my score a 9 out of 10 for plot. What about you?
Nice. Yeah, I went 8 out of 10. I do think it's pretty strong. I think I feel like we only maybe had a knot for like 1.5 parts. And we kind of stressed it into 2 here, in the sense that it feels like part 1 really clip. I think in my head, like, he doesn't find Robin until the start of part 2. So when that happened and they lowered him into the Lazarus pit, I just feel like maybe a rearrangement of scenes or something like that would have helped it bumped up. But that's, yeah, again, this is nitpicking here. It's a very fun, as you said, it's a very faithful adaptation of those stories. Of course, this episode was written, the TV version of this episode also written by Denny O'Neil, and with I believe part 2 has also Len Wein, another tremendous 70s Batman writer, also worked on this on part 2 of this. So who better to write the adaptation of such an iconic story than the person that originally wrote it? So yeah, I think it's a very, very faithful adaptation. There's a lot of fun stuff, and it's also something we talk about a lot with what we like to see in these episodes, narratively speaking, is that our characters aren't in the same area they were. They went on an adventure and they're sort of changed by it. We kind of know that there's a brand new threat that's really kind of heads and tails above of anything that we've seen before from the Batman Rogues Gallery. So it feels like a big little bit of a lightning rod moment where things have changed for Batman. And obviously these characters come back several times in this series, as well as other DCAU shows later down the line. So yeah, this is iconic for a reason, and I think our plot scores reflect that.
Absolutely, yeah. And to that point, this is the first. I'm trying to think if there's another plot that really feels like a giant world-ending episode before this.
I was gonna say, yeah, this might be the first like the world is in danger episode. Yeah, because obviously it's so commonplace by the time we get to like Superman and Justice League and stuff. But
right. Yeah, this and everything about this feels like, and friend of the show, director Kevin Altieri, I think from the get-go, and I think maybe why I would be interested to pick his brain as to why they didn't go with a traditional title card for this, but I feel like the design was to make it feel like a movie from the get-go, from everything from the score to the various different visuals that we'll talk about, both of those in just a little bit. But I think it was designed to make it feel like like a Lawrence of Arabia, or one of those grand epic movies.
Yeah, there's some Indiana Jones in there in this DNA too, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, just everything about it. So in order for it to feel like a grander scale, you almost, I feel like, naturally have to up the ante a little bit from being just a localized, oh no, Gotham is in trouble, especially based on what you've done prior to this. How can a man who, yes, he's immortal, but he doesn't seem to be he's not crazier than the Joker, right? He's not crazier than Scarecrow or more physically imposing than Mr. Freeze. So how is this person a threat? And then you realize, oh, they have this organization that they're the leader of, and they have this mastermind plan to blow up the ocean, essentially. So yeah, so it truly is. It raises the stakes and made this feel, I think, like almost like a movie level episode there. So I think that both the plot, it obviously plays a huge role in that. So all right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which of course will be animation and visuals. TMS responsible for both parts here, and thank God it's always going to be a good episode when they are in charge. Ironically, I believe director of the show, Kevin Altieri, which of course you can hear that episode, as you mentioned, in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app. But when we reviewed Off Balance, he talked about just the differences in the various different studios, of course, and that's well documented here on the podcast, our like and dislike of certain animation studios, animation styles. But I feel like this one, part one, I felt like was a little bit stronger than part two, for me at least. But I think there's a lot of fun stuff in both parts, and I think things looked pretty good throughout as far as people being on model. It was the more square-jawed, sort of true to Bruce Timm's drawing style than the original, or than the droopy nose, or some of the other versions that we've seen. But what did you like, and what stood out for you when it came to visuals?
Yeah, I think the things that really stood out, once we've already kind of talked about it a little bit in plot, but just the very cinematic feel to it. We're in exotic locations throughout. We don't really spend any time in Gotham City other than our little cold open where Robin gets kidnapped. And so seeing Batman in like a market in India, and then in this strange cave in Tibet. That scene with the Panther is really, really memorable to me because of how, I mean, we talk about those really, really early episodes of the series, like On Leather Wings, of being like dark from a color palette standpoint, that black on black, black paper background thing. But that sequence is so dark. Like Batman's suit looks like the Keaton suit almost, because it's just so and they almost kind of take off the highlight color, so you really only have the yellow of his logo and his belt sort of shining, and the rest of it you have a couple sort of small pools, but then it's just a very dark scene of Batman contending with this ferocious animal. So that's definitely, I think, a strong one. And then, as you've already mentioned, a lot of these sequences made it into the Event Man and Robin title sequences, but as we start part 2, there you have the whole place is crumbling. Batman and Robin they're on the rope and they're kind of climbing down, but then the rope snaps and they have to start coming back up the rope, and then have to take the big jump off the side of the mountain into the snow. That's pretty wonderful. And this is actually, maybe this is like a combination visual and plot note, but so when Raish gets lowered into the Lazarus pit, there's like this really weird, and like it's great, like it's tremendous and really compelling, but where we see, before he sort of bursts out of water, we see the bubbles sort of swirling, and then we see this dark figure, we see a silhouette, and then his eyes glow red and his mouth opens and fire shoots out of it before he kind of comes jumping out of the Lazarus pit. And I was like, is there like subtle like implications that he's like an actual demon in here somewhere?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know if it's insinuating that the pit itself has dark magical powers or something like that. I mean, you don't get a name like the Demon's Head for nothing. Like, what's the reason that he's called the Demon's Head? I don't know. I was wondering that myself. I didn't know if it was just thematic. I didn't know if it was designed to just insinuate. I didn't know if it was literal. I'm sure that's probably up to interpretation at this point as to whether it is or it isn't. But you have to imagine that if there's this pool of liquid that provides immortality to those that use it, there must be some sort of magic involved with it, which we see later on in the series that magic is no stranger to demons and the like. So yes, I think it's very, very likely and makes a lot of sense to say that the Lazarus pit itself may be demonic in nature and call upon some dark magic in order for it to truly be effective for those that use it. So yeah, I don't think that's, I think it can be taken either way. I think it could be cinematic and just an interesting visual and like, hey, this guy's not good, or you can kind of look at it and say that, hey, this is not this is something that is involved in the dark arts.
Yeah, regardless, it is a really an incredible visual sequence there, and just this really maniacal look on his face as he's about to throw Talia into the pit is
terrifying.
Really incredible. Yeah, and we'll certainly talk about voice acting later on, but yeah, it's that sequence really stood out to me. And then yeah, I mean, how can you not talk about, again, ripped right from the pages of those classic Batman stories, the shirtless sword battle that we get as part 2 is wrapping up. It's so iconic. And then yeah, that final shot, I've already talked about it, but when he sort of grabs Talia and goes into kiss, and you sort of embracing each other with the sun sort of setting in the background, it's I think one of the most, like, one of the prettiest shots in any this that if like if that animation cell exists, I'm sure it would go for like $10,000. But that's one, if money were no object for me, that's like an animation cell I would want to have, because I just think it's so gorgeous and lighting on it is so fantastic. And again, just getting fun as just getting Batman in these really unique situations, whether it's a dark, a completely dark museum with the Panther, or in the middle of the sun setting. We just don't get to see locations like this, and it looked like Eric Radomski and then the people that worked on the backgrounds and everything really had a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say one of the things that stood out for me was just the various different color palettes that were used throughout. And as you mentioned, very often in that first part, things were very dark, very shadowy, almost deep black colors in this, especially in the scene where Batman's fighting the Panther, and then even as he's walking through some of those alleys, it's very, 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 very dark. It's also very dark in the opening scene as Robin is sort of ambushed in his dorm room. There's lightning and rain happening also too, so there's some additional visual elements there, and these dark blues and the sort of this real deep shadowy colors there. But then later on, as Batman jumps out of the helicopter, as we've mentioned, and there's that great sequence where he is hiding beneath the snow and breaks, which is directly taken from one of the issues that this episode is based, but comes out from underneath the snow to attack these skiers with the guns. A great Batman sequence, if I do say so. Just tremendous. As he does this, it's happening in front of the crash site from where the helicopter went down. So there's this fiery glow that's coming off of the helicopter as Batman's fighting these guys. So there's these deep pinks and purples that are used up against the snow, which seem like, when you think about it, it's like that doesn't really fit for a snow scene, but it adds to the glow of this fire that's happening behind them. And I felt like that continued throughout. I thought that the color palette used as they're in the Lazarus pit, it's this neon green color, and there's like a green shading that's done with everything. And then later on in the final scene, as Batman and Ra's are fighting shirtless with their swords, there's, as this compound is exploding around them, there are these deep reds and oranges. And there's actually right before he challenges Batman to this duel, Ra's walks out of this fire. And it's another cementing of this guy is pure evil as he walks out of this fire with it, the flames behind him and these deep oranges and reds that are happening. I thought the color palettes throughout were really, really great. But like I said, I think there's certain sequences that you'll remember forever. As we said, the Lazarus pit scene is one in particular that I remembered. The camel scene, where Batman attacks this guy that's sitting on a camel, and before he attacks him, though, he's sort of just riding there along, and the camel sort of alerts the rider that something's amiss, and he sort of looks up and he doesn't see anything, and then he looks back and you just see Batman's eyes in the shadows there. And that's when Batman, he kind of just, and then he jumps and takes this guy out. And then I think the very next sequence is hilarious too, because he jumps back on the camel and he makes a noise, and the rider in front of him hears the noise of Batman landing back on the camel, and he looks around and he just sees Batman, and they just wave at each other. And you're like, yeah, okay. Sells it perfectly. And then the follow-up sequence to that is as they ride in, and Ubu is sort of observing Batman, not knowing that he's Batman yet, take this pack off of his camel and wander away. And as he turns around the corner, of course, Batman has disappeared and nowhere to be found. And so, yeah, I enjoyed that. I feel like there's a little more violence in this too. They did some tricks where they don't show the fists connecting. So you see Batman landing punches, but Ubu is out of frame, where you see, Ubu shoving Batman, and you don't see Batman quite taking the brunt of it. So the same tricks that we're used to, that were sort of designed to disguise the violence and not show as much to get around those standards and practices. But yeah, there's a lot of fun visuals in this episode. So I ended up giving it a pretty strong 9 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I actually went with another 8 out of 10. I think are some really, really strong visuals, as we've talked about across these two parts. I I totally agree with you. The unique color palettes across it feels like every single sort of different locale they go to has a unique look to it and different feel to it. I like Dick Grayson and Bruce's casual wear that we see.
And Dick, I like that Dick didn't bother to slick his hair back. He's like, I'm in Nepal. Nobody's going to recognize my Robin hair.
That's right. Yes, but I kind of like that sequence of them sleuthing on the old timey computer to figure out the plan. And yeah, I just, it's a whole bucket of fun. There's so many shots, as we've talked about, that are just really, really iconic. And, you know, when we had Kevin Altieri on the show, he said that when he sort of agreed to work on this show, like it was a condition of his signing on that he got to direct the Ra's al Ghul episodes. And you can just tell, you know, the way every action beat, and there is a lot of action across these two parts, the way it's all framed, you can just tell that, you know, even perhaps more so than usual, you know, he's on his A game. Of course, as we've said, as he personally told us on that episode that we had him on, always MS animating your shows as well. Just tremendous work all around, like we said, from the backgrounds to the color people. My only one little note that I had is that in the scene where he frees Robin, there's two weird things, and I don't know if this is like something got messed up in the HD fixing of this, or if this has always been that way and it was just more noticeable with the in higher definition. But Robin like has highlights drawn in on his gloves that are not colored. So his gloves are like monotone in that scene where where Batman frees him in the cave. And so his gloves look like extra thick because they have these extra lines on them where the shadow coloration is supposed to go.
Interesting.
And then the other thing is his cape is sort of around his shoulders for that sequence, but it's part of it is like translucent, like they didn't draw in enough of the on there. So there's some minor things I could pick at, but like I said, overall, there's so many great classic scenes in this episode. It's so much fun. And you get some great action all throughout, leading to that very memorable final shot of the hand bursting out of the Lazarus pit. So yeah, great stuff all around.
Absolutely. Always made me want a shirtless Batman figure, you know, growing up.
Oh man, how did we not get it? Well, we've bandied about doing a bonus episode doing like wish list figures. But man, like DC Direct, DC Collectibles would have knocked that out of the park. Like that would have been
shirtless Batman versus shirtless Ra's 2.
Oh man, that would have been licensed to print money.
Take my money, exactly.
McFarlane, balls in your court.
That's right, exactly. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which will be music. So part 1 was Michael McQuistion under supervision from the great Shirley Walker. And then part 2 was music by Harvey Cohen under the supervision of Shirley Walker. So 2 different composers here working on this. Obviously, both gentlemen well established, and certainly with the supervision of the greatest of all time, Miss Shirley Walker. Made for an interesting couple of episodes here. To me, I thought that the music in part 2 stood out a little bit more. There are some sequences in part 1 certainly that have music accompaniment, but it's a lot of tone setting music, with the exception of maybe of the Lazarus pit scene. I think that one clearly is your intensity of that part of the episode is turned up to 11 at that point. So the music has to swell and reach the pinnacle there at that part of the episode, and you're left with that dangling last scene of Ra's having Talia raised above his head and him laughing. So the music swelling at that part made a lot of sense and sort of building to that point. There is, I think, the music in the opening scene also with Robin being kidnapped is pretty memorable. The rest of it in the other scenes, I feel like was just sort of, it was fine. It was okay. I didn't think it was Mr. McQuistion's best work for those pieces in the middle, but I think the opening and the end pieces are great. The second part, I felt like not only with the more Lawrence of Arabia inspired themes of Batman walking, riding this camel through the desert and I thought that the fight scene music that he has with Ubu, that's I think it's strings mixed with a little bit of like xylophone or something like that. It's very up tempo, the way that it's played, and you get some like conga drums in the background, also some percussion that sort of it makes it feel like a fast-paced, frantic moment, and then that comes in later again once Batman and Ubu fight again. They bring it back, and that leads to the fight between Ra's and Batman too, also having this as the countdown happens. Also, one of the things I didn't mention in visuals that I thought was interesting that they chose to do, and I think the music accompanying it also is sort of turned up the intensity and terror for it, was as Ra's reveals what his plan is. They use these black and white still frames instead of animating it as if what would have happened. It's these black and white still photos that are terrifying of like what's going to happen
Even
to
now,
the world.
People are placing bombs, such as that one, over the various Lazarus pits around the world. These bombs are electronically linked to a private satellite already in Earth orbit.
Orpheus.
Precisely. And at the moment when Sun and Moon are in proper alignment to cause the greatest upheaval in Earth's geomagnetic field, I shall send a signal to that satellite beginning a countdown. 5 minutes thereafter, one bomb will be lowered deep into the heart of each pit. The satellite will in turn relay a microwave signal that will detonate all the bombs simultaneously. The multiple explosions will result in a global chain reaction. All the Lazarus pits throughout the world will overflow. The globe will be saturated with their chemical solution. And when the resultant cataclysm has abated, there will come a blessed peace. And this poor, defiled planet shall find itself restored to its former pristine glory.
And it was just, I thought that was such a unique way to do that. And the music that accompanies it is this low, deep, like haunting, like the world is coming to an end and this is how we're going to do it type composition. But I really liked the music in part two. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely think part two is the standout. There's a lot of like, I feel like once we move into the desert, they really got Mr. Cohen, along with, of course, the great Shirley Walker, sort of really got to stretch their legs there as far as, settling into a specific sort of idea, as you said, sort of invoking something like Lawrence of Arabia, some of these sort of classic, movies of the past that involved, people being out in the desert and things like that. It really feels like you have this wonderful, this mythic quest that Batman's sort of on throughout the rest of part two there. And, all leading to that crescendo, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, the kiss with Talia, and as you already mentioned, I'm glad you made note of the Ubu fight music as well, because that comes in quite a few times in part two, and I think that's a lot of fun too. There's a little bit of like woodland, like flutes and other sort of, I think, sort of piped instruments brought in there as a little bit as well for some of the more ominous moments. And then, of course, you already mentioned it, I think, back in when we were discussing plot, but the sequence where as it appears Batman's been shot down and the thugs are opening the snow, and then slowly we see him burst out of the snow behind him. We do, of course, get the great Shirley Walker Batman theme in there, and we also have that mixed in throughout part two as well. So overall, I think music is really strong. I do agree that it is it's certainly the heavier lifting is definitely in part two, and that's maybe why I settled on a 9 out of 10 for my music score, because I think it is great, but most of my wow, that was great notes were for stuff in part two. But that's not to say that part one is bad or anything. It's just, it doesn't have quite as many memorable things where as soon as the scene came on, I remembered the music. So it just you don't quite have that with part one as well.
Agreed. Yeah. And that's actually why I gave it the same exact score, 9 out of 10. It's really strong. It's really good. I think with something a little bit stronger or more memorable in part one, it probably would have pushed it up to a perfect score, but that's a 9 out of 10 is nothing to sniff at either. That's a strong score from both of us. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which of course is going to be voice acting. Looking for a not a huge cast, but some legendary voices with huge parts, including one of the voices that you may or may not have heard do our intro for this week. Let's talk about this week's voice cast.
That is right, Cal. So the most interesting thing, maybe not the most interesting thing, but I found it the most interesting, is that we have two different voices credited for Ubu across parts 1 and part 2. And because I saw this on IMDb first, and I was like, well, this must be a mistake. It's a crowd-funded, crowdsourced site. So I have to do some investigating to figure out. But no, in part 1, it is credited as a man named Manu Tupou as doing Ubu. And then part 2, it is voiced by a man who named George DiCenzo, who also does Ubu's voice in a later episode of the animated series. So from what I can tell, we have different voices for Ubu in parts 1 and 2. Mr. DiCenzo, folks might know from Back to the Future, but it is interesting. He doesn't talk nearly as much in part 1 as he does in part 2. And I can't tell you for sure that isn't like some sort of weird production error where like they updated the voice credit to the second Ubu voice actor for part 2 accidentally or something in reruns later. And it is his first voice for both parts. But according to the credits that on the actual episode itself, it says we have two different Ubu voice actors. So whether that's true or not, we'll find out someday. Or if anyone has any insight into this and can let us know at DCAU Review on Twitter and Instagram, I would love to hear an explanation for this. But regardless, I would say in part 1, my favorite voice performance is when after Batman lets Raish go, he finally goes, "Oh, after you," and he sort of bows, sort of mockingly at Raish to let him go first, finally. And Ubu kind of looks at him and just goes, "Hmm," and Batman goes, "Hmm." It's like a battle of the grunts. Yes. That is pretty fun. Yeah, that's probably the best thing that Ubu gets across these two parts is his interactions with Batman, and all leading to them kind of finally getting to go one-on-one in part 2 there. But elsewhere in our cast, we do have Helen Slater returning as Talia. She doesn't get as much to do as she did in her first appearance, as we've talked about. It's definitely showing a different side of her, as not quite the the secret agent woman we saw the last time. She's sort of just around to be the more sort of doting, a bit more submissive daughter. But I do think she's good in what is asked of her, even though it is something of a departure from what we saw of her in the first episode.
Yeah, she doesn't have as much to do. I think that her strongest part, I think, part 1, she really only has the moment where she confesses her love for Batman, or her brief interaction after Raish confesses her love for Batman to her, and then of course as she's begging for Batman's help to help her get Raish to the Lazarus pit. But I think the majority of her, I guess the most notable part of her performance comes in that final scene where she comes to Batman, and as you said, she sort of tries to explain to him that she doesn't agree with her father's methods and that they share the same vision, but that she wouldn't go the way that he does, or he wouldn't do it the way that he does it. And she sort of comes to him with her, with her head in her hands, so to speak, and her tail between her legs. Am I going to be your prisoner now? What's to become of me? And Batman. That's when Batman embraces her, and we get that iconic scene in the swell of the music. But I don't think that there's a whole lot for her to do here. We know that, as you said, she does return in another episode later on, so we know that her best performance, or her next performance rather, calls more upon her to do more. So they didn't give her a lot to do for this episode, certainly not as much as she had to do in Off Balance, but I think she does equally a fine job as she did in that episode.
Absolutely. And yes, that brings us to our final sort of main guest star for the episode, who you might know from things like Star Trek, But you have David Warner, as mentioned. We sort of heard him just briefly at the end of a previous episode, but here he is in all his glory, and he bouncing off of course, Kevin Conroy as Batman. And we'll certainly get to him in a moment here in more depth. But there's David Warner really is carrying both of these parts, but I think a lot of part one comes from there's a lot of expositional dialogue because we're introducing sort of the full concept of Ra's al Ghul, that he's this, immortal warrior who's lived for hundreds of years and has this vast organization of spies and warriors at his disposal, and you sort of have to deal with that, and he sort of has to have this sort of smug superiority about him, but he's still maybe underneath it all is also at heart as a warrior and a little bit of a barbarian at his heart too. And I think he gets to do a lot, and he gets to do a lot of different things throughout these two parts, from being the maniacal crazy Ra's in the Lazarus pit, doing this really haunting laugh, and then from his more serious sort of relaxed moments when he's kind of playing the puppet master in part one, and he kind of thinks he's stringing Batman along, and then sort of once Batman has disputed his claims and refuses to marry Talia, he sort of has this other turn where he has these more grandiose sort of traditional villain monologues to deliver, and then, as you already mentioned, lots of scenes of him sort of talking about the destruction that has been wreaked on this planet, and how he feels that it won't just require money, it'll require power and ruthlessness to restore the world to what it once was, and that he will be the person to do so.
Look at it, Detective. One of the last of the rainforests. The world depends upon its oxygen, yet the rich see only profit in its destruction. You, who belong to the overclass, have much to answer for.
Bruce Wayne donates millions of dollars a year to preserve these forests,
which are being depleted at the rate of 120,000 acres a day. Does your money solve this problem? No. It will take more than wealth. It will take power. And I fear ruthlessness. Humankind must be forced to serve the planet instead of its own appetites.
And you're the one who'll do the forcing?
I am qualified, yes, but I may not have sufficient lifetimes left to me.
So like a lot of stuff all over the place, a lot of different emotions, a lot of different character traits that's all got to be portrayed in one sort of consistent voice performance. And I think he knocks it out of the park here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Mr. Warner he worked in theater before he actually did screen work, and I feel like that played into his favor for his performance here, because, as you mentioned, so much of his dialogue is very much delivered in a way that is a monologue, both to the viewers at home in a way, and also to Batman as well. So his acting chops and his ability to communicate in deliver those grand speeches in the grand way that he delivers this plot to destroy the earth, and sort of he's evil. He's an evil character. He's playing an evil character. Mm-hmm. So the way that he's able to deliver it in such a diabolical way, but also such a theatrical way, I think definitely played into his strengths from those. And we keep referencing it, but obviously on the episode Off Balance, when he played that, we talked with the director, and Kevin Altieri just loved his performance and was so excited to look at the opportunity to work with him as the voice of Ra's, and was sort of blown away by the fact that he would get to work with somebody with a pedigree like Mr. Warner has. And he's an Emmy Award winning actor. He's done, as you mentioned, like dozens of roles and small roles and things in Star Trek and other places. But I think this plays into that idea that this is the voice of Ra's for me. When I hear that character voiced by anybody else, it just doesn't quite have the same levity of Mr. Warner's performance. And it doesn't come across as very threatening. It doesn't come across, it's like a quiet evil, it doesn't until he really gets to the end. And I guess you could say also when he goes in through his into the Lazarus pit, it comes out there. But it's so many times in this episode, it's a very understated sort of delivery that he gives with that undercurrent of evil underneath of it. Just really, really strong, really good. A great showcase for him in both of these parts. His chemistry with Kevin Conroy is so strong. When you hear that line of him calling Batman detective, whether you're reading it in a comic book or you're seeing it in another form of media, it just doesn't have the same ring to it to me if it's not Mr. Warner giving it. Just that delivery is so iconic to me. It's great. I don't know what else to say other than it's really phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I think you about covered it there. He's got a lot to do, and he delivers. And hats off to the great Andrea Romano. Again, I think you can hear we keep referencing back to our previous review of Off Balance with Kevin Altieri, but he I believe had some insight as well as to maybe an original voice actor picked out for Raish that ended up playing Count Vertigo instead, and then they kind of rushed around to find the perfect voice. And when they settled on David Warner, it just again speaks to the genius of Andrea Romano as a voice and casting director. And as mentioned, playing off of him, we'll get to the main event in a second here. But of course, as you mentioned, and as folks may have heard, as you said, Cal, at the start of our episode, the great Loren Lester as Robin. He as we sort of talked about, he is a little bit third and fourth wheel. He gets kidnapped, and then he's sort of relegated to chauffeur duty for Batman in part 2. So not a lot to do there. But as you mentioned, he does have the great line when Batman just tells him, "All right, we're leaving." And he just goes, "Well, it's just getting interesting though," after Talia walks out. Like it's very sort of understated and very funny. So I appreciate a little bit of levity being added, which is, often what Robin brings to a Batman story. So, and speaking of Batman himself, we will of course end our voice acting section talking about Kevin Conroy, who again, arm in arm, hand in hand with David Warner in this episode, is carrying a lot of it, both in expositional dialogue, because they have to explain how they're discovering these clues, and then he has to sort of reveal how Batman, discovered that he was sort of being had, and how he figured out the conspiracy ahead of time. And then, as you mentioned, sort of has to keep throwing it in Raish's face that he thinks he's crazy and that this plan is insane and that he has to stop him. It's just, again, it's the ultimate sort of force for good contending with this new sort of ultimate villain that he's come up against. And of course, unsurprisingly, Kevin Conroy rises to the occasion.
What? Kevin Conroy is good at being Batman, at voice acting?
We're not afraid to say it. We're not afraid to say it on this show.
We're taking a bold stand here by declaring that. Yeah, no surprise. And I think that we can so often just kind of say the same things over and over again about his performances, but so much of what Kevin Conroy can do is that when you put him up against or put him with a very strong, classically trained theatrical actor, and the fact that there's no disparity between the two of them. I don't think that you say that one is better than the other. And we know the acting chops that Mr. Warner has. And I think, again, I think that Mr. Conroy's, performance and his own training in theater and all of that stuff allowed him to sort of put on a performance of equal strength when he went up against whoever it was that was delivering a strong performance like this. So I think he pulls a great performance out of Mr. Warner and vice versa, that they just have such a good chemistry together between the two of them. And their dialogue back and forth is what I would say 85-90% of these two episodes is the two of them having interactions or talking to one another. So with the exception of the brief interactions he has with Loren Lester's Robin, one single interaction with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.'s Alfred, and the brief interaction with Talia, that's kind of what we have, the main interactions that we have here. And so it was a heavy load for both of them to carry, and unsurprisingly, both really good.
Absolutely. And for all those reasons, I think on the strength of those two performances alone, and because they are the primary driving voice performances of the show, I didn't really feel like I had any choice but to give this a perfect 10 out of 10 for voice acting.
Yep. I think based on everything that we both said, we had no choice but to give it a 10 out of 10, because I did the same exact thing. 10 out of 10 for my voice acting as well. All right, Liam. Well, that will lead us to our final scores for this week's episode, and totaling everything up, putting this in rarefied air into our top pick section. With my score, I end up with a 37 out of 40. What about you?
Very nice. Yeah, always nice to hit a milestone episode like this, and to have a great episode to talk about. I am a couple points lower at 35 out of 40, but as we jump towards rewatchability, I mean, this is an easy double thumbs up, right? Like this is one of the easiest ones we've probably had to date, as far as not only is it an incredible episode of this series, it's a great, we could give this 3 thumbs up. It's a great episode. It's important to this series, and plus these characters, Rachel, Ghul, and Talia, are, have some pretty important big moments in other series after this one. So that's like 3 thumbs up for rewatchability.
I feel like that was a very sportscaster John Madden thing to say. This gives you got 1 thumb, you got 2 thumb. Guess what? It gets a 3rd thumb. Now you got 3 thumbs up, and that's what this. Boom, boom. You got 3 thumbs right there. Yeah, I can't argue with that logic, if it is indeed logic. But yes, it's definitely a must watch. It's probably, if you're setting up the top 10 episodes, I don't know. That's why we did this podcast, I guess. The top 10 episodes that you have to watch. Maybe once we get through all of the episodes of the DCAU, we'll have to come up with a top 10. Like, it would be hard to argue against this one being not being in the top 10, just for the importance of it. Certainly the importance of the character, as we said, it raises the stakes from just a Gotham City centered plot to now the world is being threatened. Batman is taking on this global terrorist essentially at this point. So yeah, I think that we would be foolish not to say this is at least 2 thumbs up, if not 3, 4. Hey, let's give it 6 thumbs up. There you go. There we go. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, whether you've been here for all 200 episodes or if this is your first episode tuning in. Thank you for joining us. We are so glad that you tuned in. Don't forget, if you want to support us, not only can you go ahead and like the YouTube channel, youtube.com/thepodtower. If you go and subscribe to that helps us out a lot. Watch your videos, or watch the videos on there if you want to, not only from us, but our friends at Tim Talk and Watchtower Database. Some great content up there. If you love DCAU, that is your jam on the YouTube to check out. You can also subscribe to us, of course, on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all of the usual suspects. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting us, if that podcast app that you listen to us on allows you to leave a review, leave a review. Even if you've left one before, leave another one. I know Apple Podcasts lets you leave multiple reviews, so you can do that. Let people know what you enjoy about the pod. Let them know your favorite moments that you've heard thus far, and encourage other people when they're checking checking us out to potentially subscribe and support us as well. You can also, of course, subscribe to us if you wish to. There's a link at the bottom of our Anchor page and at the end, at the bottom of all of our podcast links here that you can click on that if you wish to support us that way. You can also head over to DCAUreview.com and check out our shop. Get yourself a shirt, a hat, or a mug. There's sales that happen all the time on there. So pick yourself up a piece of merch if you wish to support the pod that way. Also, another free way to support us, check out our social media at DCAU Review on Twitter and Instagram. We love talking. Liam, we talk all the time about our favorite thing, DC Comics there. We also, of course, we've talked about DCAU stuff. We talk about comics. We talk about the Batman movies, the DC movies, anything DC, we're on there chatting, and we love interacting with people that listen. It's probably the most exciting and fun thing that has come out of this podcast is just being able to interact with people that like the same things that we do.
Absolutely. It's unquestionably the best part of these shows, talking with, of course, I love doing this show with you. We are, I don't know when the last time we officially stated this, but we are real life brothers. And we've been watching these shows since we were kids, and to get to talk about it with each other every week is something that we both cherish a lot. And the fact that we have other people, whether on Instagram or Twitter, that also get to share their memories, not just and their opinions, both of our show and of the shows we're reviewing, and their own thoughts. And we've had people make their own scorecards for episodes, which is really, really cool. I always love seeing that. But yeah, overall, it's always so much fun talking about this stuff and getting to experience it and hear other people's experiences with this same material, because no two people come at this the same way. So it's always fun to hear that, and it's been fun doing 200 of these so far, and we're just getting started. And as we begin to look towards next week, we got a big one coming up next week as well, Cal.
Oh, baby Dewey. So we've left a couple breadcrumbs here and there, if you follow us on Twitter, that we've been itching to have a special guest correspondent on. We haven't had one on for a little bit. It's been several episodes. And guess what? We have a very fun one in store for you next week. Liam, we will be talking about sticking here with Batman the Animated Series for the rest of the month. We will be talking about our next episode here, which will be a follow-up to another episode directed by Kevin Altieri that we happen to love, a previous two-parter, of course, and Heart of Steel Parts 1 and 2. That, of course, the episode next week will be his Silicon Soul, which is just another one of those episodes that you look at and say, man, this is so much. This is why I love Batman the Animated Series. And we decided that we didn't want to review. We're going to have so much fun. We think that we're going to enjoy this one so much that we wanted to have a special guest correspondent, that being Jordan Gibson, artist from Batman The Adventures Continue Season 2. Also just a huge fan of the DCAU Batman the Animated Series. Just an incredible artist. He did that amazing story in the 'Tis the Season to Be Freezing comic with Robin and Mr. Freeze, and he's one of us. He gets it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely can't wait to have Jordan on the show next week, hear what they thought about all of that, with the, again, as you said, Cal, an absolute classic episode to talk about. We'll see how it holds up against something, especially coming on the heels of such another classic here. We could have back-to-back top picks, perhaps, but of course we'll have to wait and see how that all shakes out between not only our own scores, but of course our special guest correspondent, Jordan, giving their scores as well. It's going to be a really, really fun week, and I look forward to coming back here next week to chat about all of that with you.
Can't wait. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.